regardless of the political storms that may wash over this chamber during the time I have remaining, I assure our colleagues that I will depart with great hope for the endurance of the Senate as an institution.
On Thursday, February 20th, Senator Mitch McConnell announced that he would not be running for re-election. That announcement on his 83rd birthday caps off a political career that dates back to the 1960s. It also follows multiple injuries and 2 high-profile incidents freezing up in front of reporters in 2023.
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute.
The longest-serving Senate leader in American history, McConnell's decades at the head of the GOP end with him isolated from his own party.
Well, I feel sorry for Mitch. He wanted to go to the end and he wanted to stay leader. He's not equipped mentally.
He moves into his last 2 years in office in a country that he has fundamentally reshaped. This week on the Crossroads Suncast, the legacy of one of the defining figures in modern American politics. I'm Bryce Patterson. This week, I'm joined by journalist and WPSD anchor Todd Faulkner. He's interviewed Mitch McConnell multiple times over the course of his nearly 20 years in TV news in Kentucky. I wanted to start with his impressions of McConnell from those interactions.
He's always the same. And what I mean by that is he is conservative. He is on message. He's not going to deviate from what he's talking about. And it's hard to get more from him than the direct answer that he gives. And what I mean by that is you interview some politicians and they just go off on these tangents and on and on and on, and you almost have to rope them back in. Whereas you ask a straightforward question, Senator McConnell will answer it, and that's it. I mean, you can follow up, but he answers the question, and that's it. You're not going to get any more. But I think, his public persona is quiet, cold, conservative, and he is that way in person too. I mean, when some politicians walk into a room, and I've experienced this, you can tell they are charismatic. I mean, they just light up a room. Doesn't matter which party. I've seen it on both sides. When Mitch McConnell walks in a room, he's not charismatic. He just isn't. But that's not to say he's not powerful. I mean, he is, over the course of his career, influential and powerful. So that's kind of my impression of him. I do have one little story. Well, I've got lots of stories, but one story, it would have been fall of 2016. And if you remember, these two people were running for president, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And at the time, if you remember, candidate Trump then, all over Twitter, just posting things that were controversial, things that a candidate would never have said in previous presidential races. And I had to sit down with the senator in Washington, D.C., in one of his offices. And you got to remember, he's the Senate Majority Leader at that time. I asked him about the tweeting. He would not answer. He said, I don't have any comment on that, or something to that effect. So I tried again, asking about the tweeting and his reaction, his thoughts as the party leader, yada, yada, yada. I tried 3, and if memory serves, I think I tried a 4th time, and finally I just gave up and I went on. And so when the interview ended, he got up, he left, and one of his staffers kind of looked at me and grinned and said, well, you were sure persistent with that Twitter question. I said, well, not persistent enough. I didn't get him to say anything about it.
When I was a child and my dad was in World War II, I got polio. I recovered, but my family almost went broke.
That's an ad from McConnell's 1990 Senate campaign. Born in Alabama in 1942, McConnell wasn't allowed to walk for 2 years while he completed physical therapy. His father's Army service brought the family to Georgia, and McConnell later moved to Louisville, where he completed high school. Here's Todd reflecting on McConnell's early impressions of politics.
He saw some students speaking, and he admired how they kind of had control and power in that. And so he famously has said, not very popular and quiet kid, but he realized that he wanted to run for student council president. And he realized, in order to be elected, I have to convince people to vote for me. So what he did is went to the list of the popular kids, the athletes, the cheerleaders, the popular ones, and convinced them to vote for him. And he was student body president. He did it. So from early on, he realized what he needed to do to get things done, to get it across the finish line.
Later, McConnell studied political science at the University of Louisville. In 1963, McConnell attended the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, hearing that iconic Martin Luther King Jr. speech.
We will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
He graduated from the University of Kentucky College of Law in 1967. While there, he was president of the Student Bar Association.
So fast forward, he's an attorney, and then he becomes judge executive. And when you think about it, he's judge executive 1984, and he announces a bid to run to unseat a two-term incumbent Democrat. Now, you got to remember, in the 1980s, Kentucky was Democrats, not like it is today. But he decides he's going to run to try to unseat Democratic incumbent D. Huddleston. And he takes a unique approach with the person running his campaign.
Here's that unique approach in an ad that McConnell's team ran for that race.
My job was to find D. Huddleston and get him back to work. Huddleston was missing big votes on Social Security, the budget, defense, even agriculture. Huddleston was skipping votes but making an extra $50,000 giving speeches. I just missed him when D skipped votes for his $1,000 Los Angeles speech.
Let's go, boys. We got him now.
I was close at D's $2,000 speech in Puerto Rico.
Me to D. Huddleston. Thank you very much. Come on.
We can't find D. Maybe we ought to let him make speeches and switch to Mitch for senator.
Lo and behold, he wins. Now, he wins by, I think it's 5,200 votes. I mean, he just squeaked out a win, But there he is. I mean, and he is championing being a Republican that has won a statewide race for the first time in 16 years. He takes that same approach early on in his career, where he knows what he has to do to get over the finish line. And he plays the long game in every big decision, in every big legislation, anything he does. My impression is that he's always playing the long game, which incidentally is the name of his memoir, The Long Game. He's always maneuvering. And what I mean by that is, if there's a goal, whether it's getting a judge appointed or getting an appointment to the Supreme Court, legislation, whatever it is, he's got that goal in front of him. And so he starts to maneuver. Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to convince? What do I need to give up? Although he would never articulate it that way. But what do I need to give up? How do we make this work to get it done? Or what do I need to do in terms of maybe do nothing to stall what the Democrats want to do? So he's used the same approach throughout his entire career.
Over the course of that career, McConnell's politics shift. I asked Todd about those changes.
So he shows up to Washington and he figures out pretty quickly, to your point, that he's going to really need to go far more to the right than maybe he had anticipated. And he jokingly tells the publisher of the Louisville Courier-Journal, who incidentally endorsed McConnell in his 1984 bid, very rare. But he tells the publisher at the time, "You're probably never going to endorse me again." And the publisher was on record saying, "Well, why is that?" And McConnell said, "Because I'm going to have to go far right to get things done and get my agenda through as I have to." And there we go. I mean, and so it begins. And so he's just continued to be a staunch conservative to the right with very little wiggle room.
In February 1999, McConnell was one of the 50 senators voting to convict and remove President Bill Clinton from office. In the early 2000s, he became Senate Minority Whip, and in November 2006, he was elected Senate Minority Leader. Coming into that role at the tail end of George W. Bush's second term, McConnell would spend the next 8 years going head-to-head with President Barack Obama.
So, like a lot of interesting relationships when it comes to Senator McConnell, it was a little frosty between he and President Obama, to put it mildly. But the biggest takeaway, of course, comes when Justice Antonin Scalia dies. And President Obama has a little less than a year left in his term. I think it was within maybe 24 hours, McConnell's office puts out a statement saying, we're not going to fill this position, the next president is. About a month goes by and President Obama says, no. So he, very famously, out in the Rose Garden with Vice President Biden, and introduces us to Merrick Garland as his choice for the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell did what he does best. He made a decision, and now he's going to fight for it, and he's going to win. And the decision was, we're not bringing that candidate, that nominee, to a vote. We're not even going to have a committee hearing. And he stays on message, and he stays on brand. He goes on all the talk shows and says, we're not going to give the president on his way out the door a pick to put on the Supreme Court, because that will fundamentally change possibly the court. And so McConnell says, we're just not going to do it. And I mean, it is a head-to-head fight. And when you're the majority leader, like Senator McConnell was, you decide what goes on the floor. You decide what is voted on. So he never brought it to the floor. And Donald Trump wins, and Mitch McConnell knows there's going to be a conservative picked now that will go on to sit on the court. But I'll call it that whole drama with Merrick Garland and President Obama, that really was a reaction, rewind if you will, to the mid-'80s, where President Reagan nominated Bork, okay? The Democrats revolted, lack of a better term. The public revolted. Bork, too conservative, not going to happen. And they don't bring it to the floor for a vote. Once that decision is made and Bork's nomination is tanked, okay, a very irate, I would say, angry Mitch McConnell, young Mitch McConnell, gets on the Senate floor, and he basically says, I'm paraphrasing, okay, Democrats, this is how you want to play the game when it comes to appointing justices? This is how you want to play the game when it comes to appointing federal judges? Okay, we'll play that game. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he's saying. You want to play dirty? I can play dirty. Okay, fast forward to 2016, the long game, right? He played the long game. And when he saw this maneuvering of, oh, I'm majority leader now, he wants to put Merrick Garland on the court. No, because we're going to do what you did to us. Therein lies the fact that Merrick Garland never even gets a hearing.
That leads us to the Trump era, and another complicated and maybe frosty relationship.
It all goes back to, in McConnell's mind, what do I need to do to accomplish my goal? And so for a long time in 2015, 2016, McConnell would not weigh in on who he supported for the Republican nomination. And then it became very clear that it was going to be Trump. And then it became Trump. And so McConnell then has to start strategically thinking about how he wants to do things and what he wants to accomplish. And he knows that at the end of the day, he knows strategically he's got to back the Republican nominee. So you go to the RNC convention, and he gets out there on stage and says, we're going to put a conservative on the high court, and the way we got to do it is we need to elect Donald Trump president. So he bites his tongue, bites his lip, and says, this is what we need to do, and that's what he did. And a conservative got on the court. 4 years goes by. They work together. So. My impression is McConnell kind of puts his head down, does the work, knows that he's got to put up with the president that he doesn't necessarily always agree with. Back and forth. But the real tipping point was January 6th, the riot at the Capitol. As someone who is a as someone who respects the rules and order of the Capitol, of the Senate, my impression is that it really offended Senator McConnell what happened that day when people stormed the Capitol. And he said as much. He went on the Senate floor and said what a tragedy it was, and he blames President Trump.
Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
He blamed the rhetoric, he blamed the gathering beforehand, and that was a real change point. That was a real switch. But the irony is that he says it, but ultimately, fast forward through in the impeachment hearings, he does not vote to convict Donald Trump. But he goes on. I mean, he supported Donald Trump in 2020, in 2024, again, because he knows that playing the long game, what he wants to accomplish over the next couple of years.
Longtime Kentucky political reporter and professor emeritus at the University of Kentucky, Al Cross, says McConnell took a risk voting to acquit Trump.
He is in a minority of his party. That is clear. And I think that's one reason that he didn't vote to convict and disqualify Trump on impeachment in 2021. I think he would like to have done that, but he would have been in a distinct minority of his party. And that's not a good position to be in if you're leader and want to be reelected as leader. So he took a gamble that the Democrats would take care of President Trump, but they did not. And he lost his gamble.
That brings us to Mitch McConnell's legacy across his decades of public service. Here's McConnell himself reflecting on his career.
During my time in the Senate, I've only really answered to two constituencies: the Republican Conference and the people of Kentucky.
Here's how Todd describes that legacy on the national level.
Senator Mitch McConnell's legacy will be packing the court with conservatives. Full stop, period. That's his legacy. He has successfully worked and maneuvered within the guardrails of the law and the ways the Senate carries itself to get these conservative judges appointed to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, as well as hundreds of federal judge positions. That's his legacy. And he's proud of that.
Al Cross says McConnell's approach to the Supreme Court was key to the 2016 election.
I think his primary legacy is the reshaping of the federal courts, most particularly the Supreme Court. If he had not kept that seat open for Trump and made judicial selections an issue in 2016, Trump might not have been elected.
I also asked Todd about McConnell's legacy here in Kentucky.
I think at home, his legacy in the state of Kentucky, I think really will be that he helped the rebirth of the Republican Party when he successfully ran and won in 1984 and started serving in 1985. Because now, look at the state. Very Republican. And yes, we can talk about the dynamics of it's a red state with a Democratic governor, but that's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother podcast on its own. But he successfully, over the decades, has given life to the Republican Party in the state of Kentucky, where at a state level, almost Republicans everywhere. A big change from what Kentucky used to be.
He is the godfather of the modern Republican Party in this state. The Republicans had not won a race in Kentucky for a long time when he beat D. Huddleston in 1984. And when he beat Harvey Sloan by 4.4 percentage points in 1990, that really set himself up as the leader of the party and actually helped carry a couple of other state Senate candidates in, I think.
Here's Todd describing McConnell's legacy in West Kentucky.
He has helped facilitate millions upon hundreds of millions of dollars for huge projects. Think of the Department of Energy Paducah site. Think of Barkley Regional Airport Terminal, locks and dams. He has been the ticket to get that money here. So that has positively impacted the local economy. So I think that will also be a big part of his legacy in our region.
McConnell's a divisive figure, with polls in 2012 and 2016 finding that he had the lowest home state approval rating of any sitting senator. His conservative stances and partisan maneuvering mean that he's unpopular on the left, while he's never fully meshed with the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. For some, McConnell's decision not to seek re-election is a cause for celebration. Daniel Cameron has already announced his intention to run for that Senate seat. McConnell's protege in many ways, he's been critical of McConnell's recent break from the Trump administration.
Cameron, remarkably, has criticized McConnell's votes against Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., saying he was flat out wrong. This is a guy who has had Mitch McConnell as his chief sponsor in politics.
Congressman Andy Barr and businessman Nate Morris have hinted at running too. But none of the potential candidates are pitching themselves as a continuation of McConnell's legacy.
Nobody wants the McConnell label in this primary because McConnell is so unpopular. They want the Trump label.
For others, McConnell's retirement is a moment to mark decades of public service. Here's Mayfield Mayor Kathy Onan reflecting on McConnell's time in Mayfield in the wake of the December 2021 tornado.
I realized that no matter what his political standings are or mine are, he put the well-being of Mayfield before anything when he came here, and that's been very important and very appreciated by our community.
McConnell's time isn't over.
Lest any of our colleagues still doubt my intentions for the remainder of my term, I have some unfinished business to attend to.
Deciding not to seek re-election changes his role on the national stage.
Well, it allows him to be fully independent. He will no longer have to answer to the voters. He no longer has to answer to the colleagues in the caucus because he's not their leader. But he has less influence than before because he's, in many respects, just another senator. Now, I'm sure that there are still many senators who look to him for his guidance and knowledge. But he's set a marker for himself that what he's going to focus on is American defense and against the isolationist tendencies of the Trump administration.
Mitch McConnell will serve out his last 2 years in the Senate. He moves into the twilight of his political career isolated, but with a legacy that has shaped and will continue to shape generations of politics. He says he's still hopeful.
There are any number of reasons for pessimism, but the strength of the Senate is not one of them. This chamber is still the haven where the political minority can require debate. It's still the crucible in which jurists are tested for their fidelity to upholding the Constitution and lives and laws as they were written. The Senate is still equipped for work of great consequence, and to the disappointment of my critics, I'm still here on the job.
The Crossroads Suncast is a production of Paxton Media Group. Reporting for this story by Todd Faulkner and me, Bryce Patterson. You can watch Todd's recent American Truth episode on Mitch McConnell's life and legacy at WPSD-Local6.com. You can also read Todd's reflections on McConnell's legacy in the Paducah Sun and at PaducahSun.com.